20% body fat is not good enough. I know you're better than that. In this video, I'll tell you exactly how long it takes to go from 20% body fat to 10%. I was in this position myself when I hit the scales at 21% body fat in January 2023 after backpacking around Southeast Asia. I'll take you through the only target you need, how to track it, how long it took me, and what milestones you'll hit week by week. Dropping from 20 to 10% body fat is like climbing a mountain. You don't want to focus on the peak the whole time because you'll just get overwhelmed. Instead, you set your sights on reaching the next checkpoint, one at a time, until eventually you're at the top. So what is that checkpoint? Well, I'll tell you soon, but first I'll take you through the metric that I personally used when going through this transformation. And then after, I'll speak about the metric that I would use now personally and what I teach my students in the Fight Club Physique program. So the target that I used was a 0.5% drop in body fat percentage per week. So how I'd break this down is that I would aim for a 0.1% drop in body fat percentage per day. And obviously that would leave me 2 days where I would have a bit of leeway. So if I got that 5 out of 7 days, then I would have reached my weekly target. And the great thing about this is that you can get a win every single morning, and it's such a good feeling, and it can really start to build momentum, particularly at the start of your journey. And what I did to turn it into a game basically is on my spreadsheet that I kept track of all my weights. If I hit that 0.1% daily target, I'd mark it in green. If it stayed the same, I'd mark it in yellow. And if it went up, I would mark it in red. So I had this real nice visual representation of my progress. So why wouldn't I use this target now? Well, it worked out great for me, but I think there is a better way. And that's because this target of 0.5% per week, it didn't account for changes in weight over time. Like, it was just the same target throughout the entire 10, 12 weeks. So this next target helps to solve that problem. So the new metric, which I'm going to use, and is what I teach my students, is a 0.5 to 1% drop in total body weight per week. And what's great about this is that it accounts for your weight changing week on week. So the target will get smaller and smaller as you lose weight. Because when you're going through a fat loss phase, it's likely that you'll lose more at the start, and then it will slowly plateau towards the end, as you're likely to lose more weight in your first week than you are your 12th. So why 0.5 and 1%? What's the difference? So if you're not in a rush, then I think 0.5% is a great target because you'll be able to keep hold of more muscle. But if you are in more of a rush, or you want to get this transformation done quicker, but you don't mind losing a bit of extra muscle along the way, then you can go towards 1%. So on the screen is what a 1% drop in total body weight per week looks like over a 12-week period. And on the left is in pounds, and on the right is in kilos. So feel free to pause the video or carry on watching the video and come back to it later. Another option I've heard people talk about is taking waist measurements. Now, I haven't done this personally, just because there's quite a bit of ambiguity with measuring it yourself. Like, how do you know if you're being accurate every time? Whereas with the scales, you can kind of rely on being more consistent. But you could even combine these measurements. So you can have your main target as the 0.5 to 1% total body weight per week. And on top of that, you can also track your weight. And it's usually a waist measurement because that's the part of your body that most correlates to different levels of body fat percentage. So I'm sure you're thinking, how the hell do I track a 0.1% change in body fat percentage per day? Well, that leads me on to point number 2, and that is how to track it. If you don't do this next thing, it's like rowing across the ocean without a compass. Sure, you'll hit land eventually, but it will take way longer than it needs to. So this is the exact sheet that I've been using personally for years to track my weight every day, and it's the one which my students use in the Fight Club Physique program. And this, in my opinion, is the key to achieving any body transformation. And I'm currently bulking at the moment, and I'm still using the exact same sheet. It's that powerful. It looks complicated, and I'll take you through exactly how to use it. And this, along with my smart scales, is my secret weapon for achieving any body transformation. And the key is to track it every day. And this is my number one tip, is to weigh yourself every single morning, fasted, before you've drank anything, before you've eaten anything. Make sure you're just like in your underwear every time. Make sure you take off any wearables unless you wear them like 24/7. And we want to try and keep the weigh-ins as accurate as possible. Just like when you used to do science tests in school, you wanted to make it a fair test by keeping as many variables the same as possible. But every day, like, surely that sounds a bit excessive. Weight fluctuates day to day. Well, that's exactly why you should weigh yourself every day, is because your weight will fluctuate a lot during the week. So what if you decide to weigh yourself once a week, every Monday, for example, and on that Monday, that is where your weight has fluctuated, that was an outlier, then you've got some really inaccurate data to go off, and you might go and make some crazy changes that change the whole plan. You might add or decrease calories when you don't need to, or increase your cardio, when in fact you were doing just fine. And it can work the other way as well. If you're not doing too great, but then you have one outlier low weigh-in, then you might think you're doing fine, but then when it comes to the next week, then you'll realize that you actually hadn't made as much progress as you thought. So here's my super quick morning routine that I've been doing every day for pretty much the last 2 or 3 years. So I wake up, and the very first thing I do is I go to the bathroom, stand on the scales, wait for it to measure. And then as soon as that's done, I'll go straight onto my phone and enter the 3 numbers. So the first one is weight, the second is fat-free body mass, and the third is muscle mass. And then the rest of the sheet calculates everything itself. And that's it. Just do that for 60, 90, 120 days, however long it takes, and you'll eventually be at 10% body fat. And you might be thinking, how is just weighing myself every morning going to help me to get down to 10% body fat? Like, what about diet? What about cardio? What about training? Well, when you have this every single morning, you have that accountability, it makes you make better decisions. Because let's say you're offered to get a Domino's pizza, for example, and in your mind you're thinking, I don't want to mess up my weigh-in tomorrow morning. And so it makes it far easier to actually say no. Whereas if you were weighing in a week's time, you'll come up with excuses like, I'll do better for the rest of the week, So this is such a powerful exercise because it really does affect your day-to-day decision making, and better decisions lead to better outcomes. So next is point number 3, which is how to sustain it. When I was doing my first ever cut, I made this critical mistake. I ended up going too low in calories. I was making good progress at the start, and then eventually I was just not eating enough. And eventually my body kind of went into starvation mode. It wasn't getting the energy it needed, and my weight stalled. As well as having no energy, my gym lifts were also going down. So what was this mistake? Well, I was basically cutting for too long. I was in the calorie deficit for much longer than I needed to be. So how can we prevent this from happening? Well, one option is to have a refeed day. So this is basically 1 day a week where you sit at maintenance calories, and then the other 6 days a week you'll be in a deficit. And this really helps with adherence too, because you can add in a couple foods that you might be missing, and you won't have to worry about being in a deficit for that 1 day per week. Next thing is I recommend not to be in too big a deficit for up to about 3 months. If you're going for a smaller deficit, and maybe you're wanting to lose 0.5% of your total body weight per week and keep hold of a lot of muscle, then obviously the deficit will need to be smaller, so you can actually carry that on longer than if you were doing a more aggressive cut and going for like the 1% per week. And the third option is to start with higher calories. Now in the program I speak about a week 0, where you basically eat at maintenance calories. You don't go straight into the deficit. So the reason that I recommend this is just to basically ensure that you're calculating your calorie intake roughly right. So let's say if you go for maintenance and you actually lose weight, then you know that your maintenance was actually higher than you thought it was, and vice versa as well. If you gain weight, then your maintenance calories was actually lower than you first thought. But if you'd gone straight into the deficit, then you would be in a bigger deficit than you thought, and you would burn out a lot quicker. So I recommend first week, start with maintenance calories, which is your weight in pounds times by 15. And then each week, drop it down a multiplier. So you go for times 14, run that for a week, times 13, run that. And basically just keep an eye on your weekly weights. And if it's in KPI, you don't have to change anything. But if it's, if you're not losing enough or you're losing way too much, then you can adjust it accordingly. And this tip alone can be the difference between you burning out and losing the motivation again, and finally get that shredded physique that you've been after for so many years. So back to the original question, how long does it take to go from 20 to 10% body fat? Well, if we use the target of a 0.5% drop in body fat percentage per week, that would mean it would take 20 weeks to lose 10%, and that's around 4 to 5 months. And at a 1% drop in body weight per week, I estimate that to take around about 12 weeks, which is roughly 3 months. So for me personally, I was able to drop around 8% body fat in 10 weeks. So that roughly measures up. If I had recorded an extra 2 weeks, I'm sure that would have been around about accurate. So you might be wondering why I didn't have 12 weeks worth of data. Well, back then I wasn't really tracking too much. I would weigh myself very sporadically, so I have really incomplete data from that first period of cutting down, and I really regret it, to be honest. Like, I wish I was weighing myself in every day, particularly for that initial transformation. But I've learned my lesson, and I now weigh myself in every day, and I've got a couple years now of daily weigh-ins, and it's really good to see the progress and actually have a record of it. And I'm sure you'll be in the same position where you'll go through this big transformation, and if you don't have the data, then you'll probably regret it too. So make sure you weigh in daily. So there's your answer. Now you know exactly how long it's going to take. This video is how to do it. See you there.